My name is William Hamilton Smythe III, and Ham is what I'm known as, it's short for Hamilton. And I'm the class of 48, but I left in 46. And more about that a little later, I guess. But I live in Memphis, Tennessee, in an area called the Central Gardens area, which is right in the middle of the city. The city's grown all around in Memphis, downtown and out east and everywhere. But I'm right where I was almost born and have lived in 4 or 5 different places within a few, maybe 2 square miles, almost all my life, with side trips to places, interesting places like Webb School and such as that. And I would say that when a kid is 14, 15, 16 years old, you're kind of like a sponge. You don't know anything and you hadn't been many places, and somehow things that happen to you and you cause to happen maybe sticks with you simply because of the fact that you're tuned to the world, I think, at age 15, 16, and for that reason I think you tend to remember things more than, for instance, I got on the train in Memphis to go to Nashville and come to Bell Buckle in 1944, I guess it was, and rode the train down and met some guys that were coming to Webb, as a matter of fact, and they were almost all more sophisticated than I. They played poker and stuff like that, and I didn't know much about that. But I took it all in, and then when I got here, I became pretty fast friends with those guys that were in the original train trip here. And first thing that I recall walking into D Wing, which was the A, B wing, and D and C wing on the other side of the Dell. All of that's been torn down now, but it held a lot of boys in those days. And by the way, our method of arriving at the big room just in time so you weren't late is when the bell started to ring in D ring over at the school, you hear that first chime. You could jump out of bed, pull up your bed, not make your bed, just pull up whatever you had on it, get dressed and hit the door running downstairs and go down the Dell and up the other side of the Dell and on to get to the big rooms just about the time the last clang of the bell took place, and if you did that, you were on time. We had all that figured out. But I remember walking into there, and I was looking for my room in D Wing, which is D14, I think. And there was a young man walking down, obviously a student, and I reached out to shake his hand, and he said, "Don't hit me, don't hit me." And I said, "What in the world am I getting into in this place?" Well, that was Robert Edwards, and he was indeed picked on by a lot of people, and if you will be picked on, you will be picked on, put it that way. But a nice guy from Potts Camp, Mississippi. He's probably no longer with us. As a matter of fact, I think there are only 11, maybe 12 members of my class who are still alive. And I talk to them on the telephone occasionally, and we maintained relationships with several back and forth. I visit with them when I happen to be where they are, and they visit with me when they happen to be there. I think I had the fortune to ride up today with Phil Coop, who has been chairman of the board here and is a native Bellbuckian, and his family in Shelbyville. And we just started talking, and I vomited out stories that I had forgotten about, and he seemed to enjoy them, so I'm here to repeat some of those things. And I guess we started with the worst thing that, as far as I know, ever happened to Webb School was there was a member of the graduation class of I don't know what, but he was a preacher, and he's from West Virginia, and he had no boys. He had 2 girls, and he wanted them to come to Webb School. And the Webb School, as I understand, said, "It's a boys' school. You can't send your daughters here. We can't do that." He said, "Well, I understand you've got girls there now." I said, "Well, yeah, but they're local, and it's easy for them to come to school." He kept after it. So finally, they said, "All right," said, "send your girls, and we'll put them up on Plum Hill with Dr. Rosenberg. And he's got a nice house there, and he indeed put the girls up there, and they were kind of an oddity around here. They're kind of nice girls, and people would wave at them and all like that. Well, seniors, being like seniors will be, decided that they needed to go down and visit with those girls in the evening. And of course, when they did, they broke their pledge. But they, right on the front porch of Dr. Rosenberg's house, there was a window, and that's where the girls' bedroom was. And they visited back and forth on the porch and maybe inside the room, I don't know. But anyway, that happened, and it got to be sort of an epidemic. And a lot of people knew about it. And there was a fellow from Memphis, his name was Phil Thelin, Thelin. And he was not welcomed, apparently, to that group and felt left out because of it, and spilled the beans to Mr. Webb and Mr. Follen of what was going on. And so that prompted an investigation, and they started talking to seniors about what they'd done, and found out that guys were going out and taking a taxi cab to Columbia or somewhere where they had girls and had a dance or something going on. We didn't have any girls, we didn't have any place to dance. And so a lot of people did that. Well, they broke their pledge when they did. Well, the one thing after another happened. My friend Harry Phillips, who became a captain of industry, went home. He didn't have the grades to go home for Thanksgiving, so he just left. And when Harry was if he wanted to do what he wanted to do, he was going to get it done. And he was in love with a 19-year-old girl in Memphis, and they eventually married and had a bunch of children. But he went home for Thanksgiving to see his lover, Weedy Bondurant was her name. And coming back, he got on a bus to come, he thought, to Bell Buckle or Shelbyville, somewhere like that. And he went to sleep on the bus and woke up in Florida somewhere on this bus. He didn't have any money. And he had to work his way somehow, Harry would do that, back to Bell Buckle, and he eventually appeared. Of course, by the time he showed up, he had broken his pledge and any number of things. And so he was shipped, he was let go. As were maybe a third of the senior class. And they were not allowed, they didn't get their Bible. Do people still get their Bible here instead of a diploma? Well, these people who were shipped did not get their Bible. They were allowed to come back and take the final exams, as I recall, so they could matriculate to college somewhere. And that was a tough thing for everybody, and it went on down through the junior class, and I was a sophomore. Thank goodness. I don't recall breaking my pledge, but I would admit it if I did. And so it seemed like, I don't know, maybe a third, 25% of the student body was shipped before graduation. And it was in the days of polio, which was a disease that you all don't know about now, but it was deathly in the 40s. And a lot of the kids that left here and went home contracted polio. My roommate as a freshman, Bill Barnett, did, and lost the ability to use his legs at all. He lived in New Orleans, and got shipped for a pretty minor offense. He and Jim Clay on a Sunday went up to a movie in Murfreesboro, and coming back they didn't catch the right train, so they caught the late train, and Mr. Fowler was there waiting for them and said, "Boys, go pack your bags, you're out of here tomorrow." And that was Jim Clay, whose father had been an alumnus of the school, and my old roommate, and they're both still friends of mine. And so that was a tough time to happen, and so many people left the school that it sort of left a sour taste in the minds of a lot of people, including me. And now they didn't say I couldn't come back, but I'm told that they told my family, said, "Well, look, your son will never graduate from high school, certainly not this one, but he seems to have a little mechanical aptitude, so why don't you send him to a trade school? He can become a plumber and probably do pretty well doing that." But no, I stuck with it for the next year. And then I left at the end of 46, and I'm a class of 1948, but left in 46. The girls that came to live with Dr. Rosenberg were here, as I told you, and I'm not sure what happened to them, except I think they went back home in the middle of all of this. But Dr. Rosenberg was an interesting character. He was known, maybe, I don't know whether it's true or not, that he was a high political appointee in Austria, maybe the Minister of Finance, I think I heard, but he spoke a number of languages, and he escaped. They were Jewish, of course, he and his wife were Jewish, and what was happening to them was just unspeakable. But they got out of the country and somehow got here with her piano, which was in his office. Dr. Rosenberg taught a lot of languages, and Ms. Rosenberg was a great pianist, and they were very, on Sunday afternoons, there weren't any place much to go, but the Rosenbergs would have you come in and visit with them and have some coffee or tea and some cookies and sit around for a while. It was a great break from the rest of school life, and so he was very popular because of that. He was also popular because he would give you permission to go anywhere you wanted to go over the weekend, but the administration didn't know about that. And so you could go to him and say, he was European, and they had a more liberal view of what kids ought to do. And he said, I'd like to be gone today, and I'd be back Monday for school. And he would say, all right, be sure you're back in time. Where do you want to go? So you want to go to Chicago. And he said, okay, write out a slip, they could go to Chicago, or wherever you wanted to go, Dr. Rosenberg. So the administration finally told Dr. Rosenberg, you're very valuable to the school, but you cannot give permission for kids to go off somewhere because they're breaking their pledge, but you give them permission, so you can't do that. So it wound up that way. We would go into the Rosenberg's house on Sunday afternoon usually, and she, as I say, would serve tea and cookies and things like that. And another member of the household was Hermann Goering. Now, if that name doesn't mean anything to you, it tells you how old you are. Hermann Goering was one of the top Nazis during the Second World War and was just a despicable human being. And they had this cat. That cat must have weighed 35 pounds, I'm going to say. And they named him Hermann Goering. And Hermann was anywhere he wanted to be, but if you went down there, and a guy named Buddy Allison was kind of a character, and we were sitting in the Rosenberg's living room, and he sat in this chair, and somebody said, Buddy, don't sit in that chair, that's Hermann Goering's chair. He said, who's that? That's the cat. He said, well, I take precedence over a cat. I said, I'm just going to sit in the chair. Well, with that, Hermann Goering jumped on the back of the chair and began to eat Allison up. So he got up and scratched and all like that. But Hermann was kind of like that. But he would get away from time to time. And they had I don't know, they still have night school here, I don't know, but if you didn't do the right thing or your grades weren't up to something, you had to serve night school, 2 hours a night, I think, and you would go over at 8 maybe and come back at 10, something like that. Okay. But I spent a lot of time in night school, indicating what kind of student I was. And so Dr. Rosenberg, being a member of the faculty, he would have to sit at the desk and be the faculty member there for night school. And the only heat in that place, it was the junior room, which I think has been moved up here, was a big pot-bellied stove right in the middle of the room, and that was the only heat. And it was hot in there, and Dr. Rosenberg had European clothes, which meant heavy wool clothes. And come springtime, those were literally too hot to wear, but he was insistent on wearing those things, and he did. And one time, he would go out on the porch to smoke and drink his tea. His tea smelled a little bit like bourbon, and we thought it maybe was spiked a little bit, but that was fine with us. And he would step out, and then he would come back in, and he came back in one time, and Buddy Allison, again, a source of a lot of trouble, was feeding the pot-bellied stove while he was out, and it was hot already, and it got hotter and hotter. And so Dr. Rosenberg came in, and he said, Allison, what are you doing? You're throwing coal into the stove. And he says, well, I was cold, Doctor. You're cold in all this heat? And he comes over and gets Allison by the neck, and the two of them go over backwards in the chair onto the floor. And everybody got up and shook hands and wound up okay, but that was kind of an interesting thing to do. But during that time, when Dr. Rose would do that, we would, and Herman might have been missing for a while, we would raise one of the windows, and I was kind of a mimic, and I would and someone would say, Doctor, Herman is out there. Herman is out there in the woods. And he would get his flashlight and go out there, and you'd see him, puss, 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 Herman, puss, puss, come here. Well, Herman wasn't out there. We just did it to mess with Dr. Rosenberg. I don't know how he kept his sanity, really, but he did. He was very, and I understand, stayed here for a long time. And Mrs. Rosenberg stayed here for a long time and ran the choir and taught piano lessons and things like that. So those kind of things happened. Things were kind of wild in the 40s, I guess, and there were caves close to here, and the thing to do was to go over and climb around in those caves. And there was one where the water came up, and the cave was in there, you were told, but the water came right up to the edge of the mountain, and so you didn't see anything other than a place to jump in the water. But it was said if you jumped in the water here and swam a little ways, you could come up inside the cave where there was air to breathe and that sort of thing. You had to sort of take that on faith, and I think most people that did that, nobody ever got drowned or in trouble. Is the fact that other people had done it, and by God, if they could do it, you could do it. So that's what we did. And Bobby Allen and Ken Larkey were, I think, roommates, and they were pretty adventurous guys, and they got lost in one of those caves, and nobody could find them, and so we had a small group, went out to the cave, and dove into the water, because the water was high enough to where you couldn't see the opening to the thing, and just trusted to luck somehow that you'd come up with room to breathe. We did that, and we found them. They were lost. The cave had tributaries and that sort of thing, and we finally roamed around and hollered at them and banged. It took had some tin hot plates, I think, and some spoons, banging around like that. And we found them and got them, and everybody went home, and we're doing fine. Although, not long after that, Bobby Allen, who had a bicycle and had Ken Larkey on the back of it, they were coming down Plum Hill, and it had just been paved. And I don't know what happened, but somehow the front wheel got turned sideways, and over the top of the thing, both of them did, and Ken Larkey came down with his face right on the brand new blacktop, and Bobby Allen was not injured, but Ken was known as Scarface for a long time after that. And as far as I knew him till he died, and I don't think he ever did anything about it. He became he's just a different looking guy, but not bad, but those kind of things would happen in those days. The only fire department was the boys' fire department. It was a little house, a little shed really, over there on the edge of the dell, and inside was a two-wheeled vehicle with a couple of places where boys could get in there and push the thing around it. And it was in the middle of it was all this hose, fire hose. So there was a large two-story white frame house just on the west side of the railroad tracks. And so we got that thing out and ran down there with the hose and everything. Well, there were no hydrants anywhere at all, but there was a little creek that ran fairly close to it, so all we could do was get, we formed a line. People would go out and pass buckets and what we're throwing water, making no progress. We're never going to conquer that fire doing that way, but we did the best we could. And I was up on the second floor, and there was a piano, I think probably a pretty valuable piano, but it was up there all by itself. It was going to get burned up. And I thought, let's don't let it burn up. Let's try to save it. I know the only thing we can do. So there was some French doors. We opened them, and we got to running with that piano and went out the window. And it came down on the ground, 2 stories down. And probably there's never been a chord played on a piano that matched that, because all 88 keys at one time went. But the poor piano, of course, it was not able to be saved. But we did save it. It didn't burn up. We got it out there. If somebody wanted to put it back together, we thought that would be fine. So we came back, and I just remember going back in, and we had gang showers in those days, and everybody was dirty and had soot all over you, and we needed, every inch of your body needed to be cleaned, because every inch of it had gotten dirty doing that. And that was kind of an interesting thing to have happened. Well, Dr. Tucker was he was a fine gentleman, and his wife, they lived as faculty members in D Wing, and we knew that. And Dr. Tucker had certain habits like we all have, and he would wake up in the morning, he would walk down the corridor and out to the front door. He would get the newspaper and take it back, but on his way down, he needed to hawk up and spit, and we'd hear him coming. Now, he was going to wait till he got outside to spit, so don't worry about that. That didn't happen. But when we knew he was walking, it was also laundry day, and everybody would take their laundry and wait for him to come down and throw the laundry out just as he would get there. And he was covered up with laundry, trying to do that. Bless his heart. And I guess what that leads to is there was a fellow in my class, Rusty Norval, who wound up being a teacher here, and I think his family was around. He was from Tulsa, Oklahoma, and his grandfather sent him. He had a lot of money, and Mr. Webb expected he was going to build something for him someday, so he shouldn't mess around with Rusty. But Rusty he was a real character. So we put Rusty in a laundry bag one day and went up to Dr. Tucker and Miss Tucker's door and knocked on it. And so Dr. Tucker said, "We've got a wildcat in this laundry bag and we don't know what to do." Well, Rusty was inside the line. The thing was, and so we don't know what we ought to do with him. Well, Miss Tucker had disappeared a little bit. Then she came back and she pushed him aside, and she had a .44 caliber revolver from back, and she was pointing at the thing. So we said, "That's all right, we'll take it." So we took off running with Rusty. Rusty said he had splinters all in him for dragging him down that wooden floor. But we saved his life, for goodness sake. I've stayed clear of Mr. Fallen. I was scared to death of him. He was very serious, and I don't really have any stories about him other than he shipped more people. And I'm told that somebody found his correspondence. He was very conscientious about keeping papers and that sort of thing. And they found his correspondence, and he was responsible, I guess, for shipping almost everybody. Maybe Mr. Webb would tell him to ship them, but he would do it. And I'm told that there are in the archives somewhere around here letters that he wrote. And he was a forbidding sort of fellow to the students anyway. And I'm told that those letters shed a different light on him, that he was very conscientious about it and wrote up why, and it was that, and very apologetic almost, which I can't imagine Mr. Fallon apologizing to anybody for anything. But in those letters, I'm told that he made it clear that hurt his soul to have to end somebody's career at this college the way he had to do it. And I'm interested in hearing that, which sheds a completely different light. Because we were scared of him, and he shipped folks when they needed shipping. And I'd go back a little bit to the original thing, from the girls and the seniors going down to it. A guy named Philip Phelan, Thelin, maybe I said this, was not looked upon with favor about the crowd that was going down there.
Exactly.
And he felt in trying to get back at him, he went to the authorities, which would have been Mr. Webb and Mr. Fowler, to tell them what was going on. And that was the match that lit the thing that led to all this horrible stuff that I think it nearly killed the school. And later on, it did happen like that. But I had an interesting relationship with son Will. One of them was, I had a friend from who's in my class, but his name is Fred Beeson. And Fred is living, I think, with his daughter up in the Michigan area, and comes back to Memphis every now and then. But Fred and I looked incredibly alike at the age of 15, and really on up into our late lives. People got us mixed up all the time because we tended to look alike, and I guess we did. And so we were standing out there in front of the big room one time, as I recall. Mr. Webb came down the path, and back in those days, nobody got a haircut. Everybody wore blue jeans and brogans because it rained all the time. Everything was wet, and you had blue jean coat. So not nearly the good-looking kids I see today walking around the way they do. But Mr. Webb came along and grabbed Fred by his hair and said, "Hamilton, come with me. I'm going to thrash you within an inch of your life," thinking it was me. And that Fred says I was standing right there and kind of walked away whistling. I don't remember it that way, but he's still mad about it. It's been right at 70 years. And he's still mad about it. He turns red in the face when we tell the story. But that is true, and I don't remember. I wonder what he was going to whip me for. And Fred wouldn't talk about it. So I never knew why I deserved to whip him, but I'm sure I did. I didn't get one that time. I had other occasions to be whipped. But during that time, I was, 16, I guess. My best friend at home in Memphis, Tennessee, Perry Pipkin, was killed in an automobile crash. And it affected me, affected his family, and I was asked to go to Mr. Webb's house one afternoon. I thought, what have I done now? I've never been called into Mr. Webb's house. So he had to tell me that Perry had been in an automobile accident, was dead, and that I had to go home to be with the funeral and be one of the pallbearers and that sort of thing. So I made arrangements to do that. And it had to be in the wintertime because I remember it was cold. And Mr. Webb was very nice about it, and I appreciated his attitude. And I was down there waiting for the train to come, and I didn't have an overcoat for some reason. And a nice guy who what's his name? These people in the furniture business in Birmingham, I'll think of it in a minute. Anyway, he came down and saw I was cold, so he brought me his overcoat, which I really appreciated. I needed it. It was cold out there. And so I wore the overcoat home and back and gave it back to him. And I ran into him a number of years later in Florida. And he was, at this point, well, he was enamored of a young lady from Shelbyville who was a famous horse rider and showgirl. Amy, something was her name. I'll think of it maybe in a minute. And I knew that he was, as a matter of fact, Amy's father had him removed from Tennessee, and some sort of act of the legislature said that if he ever came back across the lines in Tennessee, he would be immediately arrested, thrown into jail, and they'd throw the key away. It was something horrible that he had done, or they thought he had done. But that was the last time I thought I'd ever see him. But I knew that he'd gone down to Florida and he'd married some young lady, and they made a lot of money being interior decorators, mainly on large yachts that would be tied up down there in Fort Lauderdale, Florida, places like that. So I was staying at the Breakers, which is kind of a fancy place down at some kind of meeting. And I said, I'm going to go down and see if I can find that guy. And so I did. I went down, and right on the corner of Worth Avenue, which is the main drag, and County Road number 1, I don't know, there's this very prosperous looking interior decorating outfit. And I said, I bet that's where he is. So I walked in there. Now, we hadn't seen each other in probably 30 years at least, maybe 40, I don't know. And I saw him over there, and so there was a stool and a little round table, so I sat up on the stool, and I watched him, and he saw me watching him. And I watched him, and he watched me and watched him. And finally he came up, he said, let me ask you something, sir. Can we do something here to help you? I said, oh, I don't think so, I'm just slumming. And he said, have I ever known you, and did we know each other somewhere? It was Webb School where we knew each other. And then all of a sudden it clicked in his head. And yeah, there we were. And he was very prosperous at that time, had a Rolls Royce, and he wore a mouse-colored, what would you call it, a suit that the top and the bottom were both very fluffy looking stuff, I don't know. But anyway, he was showing off, I thought. And he and his wife came by and picked us up, and we went out to dinner. And I tried to keep up with him after that, and I understood. I don't know that he came to a bad end or not, but I guess he did as well as he could with the circumstances that he had. He seemed to stay in a lot of trouble, I know that. But that was an interesting, the old story is that the sun never sets on a Webb School boy. Is that a term that's still used? The sun never sets on a Webb School boy. And literally, you can see them in Europe and whatever, and a lot of times they're there, you don't know it, but circumstances may throw you together, and somehow, well, where'd you go to school? And well, I'll be darned, I was classes. So it's literally true. You run into Webb graduates. So after I left Webb, I went back to Memphis and went to Christian Brothers High School, and graduated there in 1948, which would have been my year to graduate from Webb, and went to Southwestern College, which is now Rhodes College in Memphis. But I did some other college. I don't think anybody wanted me. They wanted me to leave everywhere I went after a while. But I went to the business school at the University of North Carolina in Chapel Hill. I went to summer school at the University of Colorado in Boulder, Colorado. And probably another place or two, I don't remember. But in any case, it was an interesting career getting out of that. And along came, after college, the Korean War. It was known as a police action, but it was really a war. And it was hot as hell over there, and in every way you can name, and cold as well as you can name. And all I wanted to do was get in and out. I didn't know what I wanted to do, but I knew I didn't want to make a career out of the service. And so I asked, every program that I looked into required some getting ready stuff for a year or two. Then you served, and then you served 7 years in the reserve. And I just said, I'm not up to that. I went to the Coast Guard and everything I could find that would be different from that. So I finally said, what is the fastest way I can get in and out? I said, if I just go join? Nope. Said, then you'll be ready, regular Army, and that'll be 3 years. I said, what's shorter than that? Said, if you get drafted. I said, well, that's for me. So a friend of my father's was head of the draft board, number 84 in Memphis, Tennessee. So I called him, Mr. Fred, this name. Yes, sir, I know who you are. Your father and I know it. I want to come by and see you for a few minutes. All right, Hamilton, but you know I can only do so much. He thought I was going to ask for a deferment. But no, I said, what I want to do is get drafted so I can get started on this thing to get in and get out. He said, well, you realize you'll come out of there as an E1, which is the lowest thing you can be, and we're shipping people to Korea right now. And I said, well, I'll contend with that when I have to, but I'd like to. So I got drafted in October, I think, of whatever year that was, 1952. Yeah, it was. And so I did that and went to Fort Jackson, South Carolina, and decided that the United States needed protection from the North Koreans. And I got with a couple of guys, one on the East Coast, one on the West Coast, and I was in the middle of the Mississippi River, and said, let's be sure that no North Korean crosses our shores anywhere in the United States. And sure enough, they didn't. Now, we didn't have much to do with it, but we always said that's why they didn't, because we were on guard. No wonder nobody came by. But I wound up in some sort of administrative thing at regimental headquarters in Fort Jackson, which was fine with me because I was, on the weekends, my love of my life, and who later my wife for 60 some odd years, she was at Duke getting a master's degree in Eudora Welty, who was then not as well known as she became later on, and she got her master's degree from Duke, having gone through Southwestern with Phi Beta Kappa, and everybody said that Catherine was her name, Catherine Hines, from Tupelo, Mississippi, that Catherine never made a B. She was so smart. And I said, well, neither did I, but it was from the other end of the spectrum. And and she did make one B in French, because Dr. Embry said, Miss Hines said, you can read, you can write, you can reason. In French, you can't speak French. And I can't give an A to anybody that can't speak any part of the language. So she got a B. But nobody ever knew that. Bless her heart, she was a staunch person and famous really in a lot of ways. We're memorializing her now. But anyway, I was on the weekends. I had a big old Buick Roadmaster, and I would pick up soldiers that wanted to go home for the weekend. I'd drop them off on the way to Durham, North Carolina, which is where Duke is. And I'd wind up at Duke, and we'd spend the weekend together. I'd come back and pick all those guys up. Of course, I charged them to do it, but I wound up in the transportation business. And somebody said, well, that's why you started your transportation business.
Oh my gosh, okay.
So I went to work for a company that was owned by friends of my father, and it was a nice little company. Now it's a much bigger company, but I didn't think I was going to. It was a small company, and I was number 3 guy there, and all of a sudden somebody called me. Well, Wythe Chandler called me. He was a friend of mine, a lawyer, later mayor of Memphis, and said, how would you like to go to the Yellow Cab Company and run that place? I said, I don't know anything about taxi cabs. He said, I know it, but said the people from out of town have bought it, and they don't know what to do with it, and people send somebody and they're no good, and we need somebody to go in there. He was a lawyer, and that law firm represented the cab company for many, many, many years. And I said, well, heck, I think I'll give it a try. So I did, and rose in the company. Well, I started off as vice president and general manager, so I guess that was pretty good. But the ownership was in Louisville, Kentucky, but I always wanted to become the owner of that. And I had a bus company there as well. And So I kept asking the people that owned it, said, why don't you sell it to me? You don't need to own this. I'm not sending you any money because we're self-insured and I have to keep a lot of cash here to settle claims and that sort of thing. So I'm not sending you any money. And so well, I don't know. We like the way it is. And so that company was a big company it was a conglomerate, which was a big thing in the 60s.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, in this thing, they had a dairy in Chicago, a cold drink company in Connecticut, a steel company in Nashville. Must have been 10 different companies in that thing. Mm-hmm. And it was bought by a fellow by the name of J.B. Fuqua from Atlanta, Georgia, and a very accomplished gentleman who had lost his son tragically in some sort of accident, I don't know. And by the way, he later endowed and became the business college in Duke University is the J.B. Fuqua College of Business. And so I had breakfast with him one morning we all met in California somewhere. My wife was sitting with him. She said, isn't Mr. Fuqua up there at lunch and getting breakfast? I said, yep. I said, why don't you go ask him to come have breakfast with us? So I said, look, we're a pretty little company with all these, but I went up and got him. He said, sure. So he came in and he said, now tell me what you do. I told him. He said, is that a business that this conglomerate ought to own? I said, no, sir, it's not. And I've been trying to buy it for several years, and for some reason they just won't sell it to me. He said, well, tell me about it. I did. He said, I agree with you. That's not a company. I said, you want to buy it? I said, I do. And so he said, sell that company to that guy right there. So I went out and scared up some money and bought it, and had been in that business. And we were also in the cemetery and funeral home business. My wife's family had started that, and it was a memorial park without gravestones and that sort of thing.
Right.
And Mr. Hines, Elliot Clovis Hines, was my wife's grandfather, had gone out west and seen this sort of thing in California, brought the thing back to Memphis, bought 250 acres right on the edge of Memphis. And then right now it's kind of in the middle of East Memphis, and started a cemetery and funeral home. It was cemetery only there, and he stayed with it as long as he could. He never drove a car, and he never owned a house. He said a house is a bad investment. So he rented homes, big, nice homes. And, but if any money he came across, he wasn't buying a house. He was going to put it in that business, which he did. And he built a nice little business. He came home one day, he had a chauffeur, but for some reason he rode the bus that day. And he tripped getting off the bus, hit his head on the curb, went to the hospital, and wasn't able to function, and probably was there for a year or something like that. And the lawyers at the trust departments of banks got hold of it, and we were too young. I was maybe 30, less than that probably. And my wife and I said, we don't like the way they're running this thing, but we can't do anything about it because you left a will that did this, that, and the other. But she wound up, enough people died to where she wound up with all the stock of the thing. And at that point we could do whatever we wanted to. So we let all those people go and began to run it ourselves. And she moved on the property and was president of that and chairman for a long time. And after many years brought my youngest son Clay, who is now headmaster of the junior school at lower school at Memphis University School in Memphis, highly thought of institution. And so we had him as president of that, and he ran it for a while. And then enough things happened to where it got sold. No, there was a roll-up thing going on in the United States where people were trying to buy up good-looking cemeteries and funeral homes, but finally got to where there was nobody else much to get acquired except a real big operation in California, and ours was the next biggest and the most beautiful of all of them. And Mr. Hines had a cave of Macpela. What he did was he hired Dionisio Rodriguez, who was a Mexican who never spoke English. There are volumes of books written about him because he created wooden things out of concrete. There's stumps all over the place that are wood. There's a hollow tree that you can go in and sit down in there. That's a tree all out of concrete made by him. In North Little Rock, there's a huge mill house there. Water running through it. Everything looks like it's wood. It's all concrete. And so he got that going. So it became sort of a tourist thing. People would like to go in the cave and they never really finished. There were niches in the cave, and each niche was supposed to be something out of the Bible, and it didn't get very far along before my wife took it over, and she got all those niches filled out all the way. And her grandfather was kind of a Barnum Bailey sort of guy in a way, and he featured a painting by Rembrandt, looking up at a waterfall coming over with a moon in the background and a woman with long silvery hair floating down like that. And he said, "Come and see the Rembrandt," where people went. Well, it was Miss Mary Rembrandt, who was a local artist, who did this painting. And it may still be there, I'm not sure. We sold it in 1997, and we're lucky to do what we did.
Yeah.
And I spent a lot of time running that. And then in the middle 80s, the insurance business sort of fell apart. The reinsurance companies were not taking much new people. And so people that had been in insurance for years said, "We can't insure you anymore." I said, "Well, you're making money off us, why not?" I said, "We're just not going to do it." So I got together with 4 other people, and we started our own little, what did we call it, preferred transportation insurance, something like that. Mm-hmm. And that thing has grown from, this was the middle 80s, and within the last year it's achieved an A stable rating by the rating areas, which are very tough on rating people, and we're pretty proud of that. Mm-hmm. And I'm chairman, and my son is president of that, so I don't have to do much anymore. Mm-hmm. And I stay advisory to that. Okay. And and that takes up a fair amount of time. In the meantime, I was chairman of the Convention Visitors Bureau in Memphis, mm-hmm. and we were having, how can we make this thing go? The Chamber of Commerce had gone broke, and I got stuck out there with them, and my friend stuck out over here, and we had a staff that had to be paid, and we had to find a place for them to meet, but people were helpful, and we did all that. We eventually got paid back, but was interested in doing that. And so somebody on my board said, I had always thought, see, when he was with First Tennessee Bank, a guy had come in there wanting to do an agri-mart, and they had some property out on Lamar, headed for that, and the bank said, things are kind of tough, we don't even want to finance that now. So he had thought about it all this time and brought it up again, and I said, well, let's get the government and business together on something. If they'll come up with the land and all like that, we can do something from that. So we did. We called it Agri-Center International, and we had some international stuff going on, so we didn't cheat much when we called it Agri-Center International. But it's 1,000 acres within the city limits of Memphis, Tennessee, hooked to 3,000 acres across the road, which is another thing that had been a farm, well-run farm for a long time, but it had been let fallow and nothing but grass growing where we were. So we wanted 1,000 acres of that, and we'll form a group of people that will run that thing, and it will be successful. And there's not another one in the United States. We went around and we found one in Kansas City, which is located downtown. It went broke, and we saw one close to Disneyland in Florida. And it was a grandiose thing. We said, well, if we got to compete with that, we'll never do that, because it was backed by a huge company. But said, they aren't doing anything, so let's go ahead and do our thing. So that's what we did. And I was chairman of the Shelby County Agri-Center Commission for much too long, something like 27 years, something like that. And I said, somebody needs to come in. Well, you unhappy? No, I'm not unhappy, but you need new blood. And so I asked them about that. I said, do something to where we can do that. So they passed a law that you could only hold office for 5 years or something. I said, good, that gets me out of it. So I'm chairman emeritus of Agri-Center International. But that has taken a lot of time and effort, and I'm delighted to say that it's very successful. And I spent a lot of my time doing that and working with other 501c3 operations. My daughter has a large now ballet company, but small, when she got it started. And there's several others, the Boys and Girls Club, which we founded with 9 guys that got a little group together, and that blossomed, and we invented the Boys and Girls Club. We didn't invent it, we brought it to Memphis. And it's been very, very successful. I think there are 5 or 6 clubs, and it's largely minorities that are in there, and they're the ones that need the help and and we've been able to see that they got that help. And there's we found a good angel, and he's got every kid that's in there has graduated from high school. They go through his program, and it's techno stuff. They learn all about computers and know more about the internet than anybody else. And there's nobody has failed. Everybody has graduated from that.
Yeah.
And it's just, and the citizens that have been produced out of there, who would not have ordinarily been helpful for anything, are all of a sudden there and add to the population some good people. We need more of that. So.